One of the flashiest things in Astro is view transitions, and that's what this module is all about. Now these are opt-in per page view transitions, and you can do it with just a few lines of code in Astro. This is a browser API, although all browsers don't support it. They do have graceful fallbacks for anything that doesn't. At its most basic, you simply add a view transitions component that Astro gives you to the head of shared documents, and then when you click a link, it will transition with a simple fade between the different routes. Now there's a lot more to this, so we're going to break this out into several videos, but this video just serves as a conceptual overview to kind of understand the basics of what it's doing. To give you access to the different events that happen throughout this transition, Astro has 5 different directives, and these API lifecycle events allow you to tap into this sequence. We'll go over the sequence of all this in greater detail later on, but essentially when you click a link, it fetches the new page and adds the data Astro transition attribute to the HTML element with the value of forward or back as appropriate. Then it calls document.startViewTransition, which is that browser API, and again, it has a graceful fallback for anything that doesn't support that. Now at this time, it takes a screenshot of the current page, and then it starts the startViewTransition callback. During the start view transition callback, the router performs a swap, which consists of a bunch of different events, but essentially what it's doing is comparing the 2 different pages along with any direction you've given it and keeping things that are the same in both pages and swapping out everything else. Now, after it's swapped it all out, it fires one of those lifecycle events called after swap. Again, we'll look at some of this later, and then essentially waits for any style sheets and loading to happen before resolving the transition. If there are any new scripts it needs to add, it adds at this point, and then finally it loads the Astro page load event. Now, like I said, you can give Astro more specific direction. This is just how view transitions work generally, but what you can do is provide the transition name. Astro is simply abstracting some of what you can just do in standard CSS, but what you're doing is adding a transition name to shared elements on 2 different routes. As long as they share the same name and their unique names on each page, Astro will transition those gracefully for you. You can actually style these animations as well. By default, it provides a fade event, but you also have access to slide events, or you can even write your own custom ones if you want. Now, one of the real powers of view transitions is that you can maintain state between different routes. This means, for instance, if you have a video playing, you can add the transition persist directive and maintain the state of the video between 2 different routes if both videos exist on those pages. Now, you may be thinking ahead and wondering, what about accessibility? Well, 2 things to note here. One is that there's a route announcement that happens between route pages. And secondly, if somebody has prefers reduced motion on, some of those default animations are reduced. One other thing to note here is you can't simply add view transitions and just hope everything is good. Because different scripts might need to run on the new route, you need to make sure that you've handled those successfully. And we'll look at how to handle client-side JavaScript when it comes to view transitions. Now, before we actually explore this step by step, let me just encourage you that you should use this sparingly. In other words, just because you can do something with view transitions doesn't mean you should. A bad UX is a bad UX, no matter how interesting it seems to you as a developer. Okay, in the next video, we're going to take our portfolio project that we worked on several modules ago and add view transitions to it. I really hope that conceptual overview made you excited to get started with view transitions. Now, let me encourage you to download the code I have linked below. It's just like the portfolio site, except we've added a few extra things and have updated the dependencies to the latest as of the recording of this video. So let's go ahead and get started. Once you have it in your code editor, you're going to want to make sure you run npm install to grab these node modules. And then I'm just going to come over here and do npm run dev. Now, we do actually have a server as well that we use to capture our content form, just kind of in a fake database at the time. We'll get back around to that eventually, but for right now, I just want to come over here and make sure we've got this up and running. Okay, so there we go. Perfect. Now, at its most basic for view transitions, you simply need to add this component right here to the similar head between different pages. Now, the way we structure this, if I come inside my layouts, I've got a base head right here. So here's where I would want to add this. So let me go ahead and come over here, and I'm just going to add it right here, view transitions like this. Now, if you hit Control and Spacebar, you should be able to pull this in from Astro::transitions. That's the one you want to do right there, just like that. Okay, so it pulls it in right here, and if I come back over here, you'll notice something starts to happen. I can come over to my writings, and now it fades gracefully to writings, and then project, and then back to the home page, so the view transitions are already working. Now, there are some problems, and these are some of the things we're going to want to work through. So you can't just throw this on a site and expect everything to work. For instance, if I come down this way, I've added a new little theme picker, where if you click this, it should actually switch between light and dark mode. However, it's not working. If I refresh the page, though, and now I do it, you'll notice it switches to light mode. So in other words, this client-side JavaScript is not really running after a page transition, and that's something we're going to want to look at. So all that to say, we're going to want to move it back to dark mode if I can. There we go. Okay, perfect. So we'll stick in dark mode for now, just so we don't burn our eyeballs out. So that's the very basics of it, but just a note that you do need to pay attention to client-side JavaScript, which is one of the reasons I want to do this module. Now, as you can see, as we move between routes, it does provide a transition, but really the snazzy part is when things move between different routes. So it kind of looks like a single transition. So if I come to this project page right here, wouldn't it be nice is if I went over here and then scroll these kind of to the right position right here, right? Well, we can do that just by providing a name, and that tells Astro, well, it tells the browser, these are shared elements between routes. So let me go ahead and come over here, and if I look inside my index.astro page right here, you'll notice that I do have this project section. If I click inside here with command click, and I come down here, you'll notice it's a project tile. So this is what we're going to want to provide that name on. So this entire component needs a name. So I'm going to come over here and just on this article, provide a name. Now you can do this with transition:name like this, and just provide it a unique name. Now there are a couple things to note here, but let's just start by providing this the URL. Now if I save this here and open it up, I just want to look at this in the DevTools. If I move over this way, you'll notice it's given this a view transition name property. The way view transitions work in the browser is you just provide this in CSS, and that's essentially what it's forwarding along here. So while Astro is abstracting a little bit of the magic, that's all it's doing. Now, the cool thing is now that all these on the project page and all on the home page share the same thing, as I move between these different routes, you'll see it actually now knows to transition those between them. Just like that, you see it kind of stays in the viewport. Let's see that again. If I come over here, and if I come here, it kind of swoops up, but you can see how it's kind of carrying them between different routes. So either by clicking a link or going backwards or forward in your browser history, it will try to transition between those different shared components. Now we've got a couple other things here, like writing is right over here. So if I come inside here and I click here, all of these things, the date, the title, the description, the image, those should transition between those. Now again, you may not want to do this for like a bad UX, but you may like it, and I think this is okay overall. Again, if somebody has reduced motion on, it should not do this, so that's a good test, and we can test that here in a second. So let me come back over this way. What we find is that there's a postcard component that we created that holds all of this in this kind of view. Now we could simply add it to the entire article, but this article won't exactly exist in the same form on the new page. So instead what we want to do is provide each of these different items, the image, the heading, the formatted date, the description, all of those their own view transition name that's unique between routes. Now there's of course a couple of ways we could do this, but for instance, I might come in here and just have transition name, and I might want to have something unique to the actual route and then add something on top of that. In other words, it's possible that I have a date that's the same between two different posts, but I wouldn't have a slug followed by date. So we might want to do something like that. So I'm going to do something dynamic right inside here, where we're just going to have the post.slug. And then at the end of this, I'm just going to provide whatever type of thing it is. In this case, it would just be an image. So this would be whatever this post slug is, -image. I'm going to grab all this right here. We're going to do the same thing for the heading. And we'll call this title. And we'll do the same thing for the date, and we'll just call this date. And finally, we'll do the same thing for the description. Okay, so that's taken care of it here, but unlike our other component, when I move into the post, that exact component doesn't exist. So I have to do the same thing inside of here. So let's actually open up my slug component, which is where we created this way back when, and I'm going to come inside here and do the same thing. So I've got my formatted date. Here I would just want to make sure I name this the same thing. So this would be date. Heading, the same thing. We're going to name it title. Description, the same thing, we're going to name it description. And finally, the image, we're going to name that the exact same thing as well. Now this should be unique between whatever routes I go between. That means if I come back over here, you'll notice it kind of swoops between routes. Isn't that really cool? So I come in here, same kind of thing. Now all we've done so far is name different nodes between routes. However, what I want to do is come in here and I want to show you a couple of things that you can do to kind of see what's happening behind the scenes. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the animations. And if I come over here and go to the home page, you'll notice that now I've paused this and I can kind of step through it one at a time. What I want to do is come back over here to the elements. We're going to scroll this down. You'll notice that I have this view transition pseudo class that's been added here to the HTML. Now this is something the browser does and Astro is just hooking into it. In fact, if I come inside here, you're going to notice several things that look really familiar. You'll see how it's grouped things like the title right here or the date. You might remember that I mentioned that there's a screenshot taken before everything transitions, and that's essentially what this keeps track of. As we step through this and it moves back to the home page, you'll notice that that then disappears because now it's swapped everything out and we're set to go. So Astro is not creating this, it's simply tapping into the browser's ability to keep track of the state and kind of hooking into that for you and making it easier to work with. Now in the next lesson, we want to look at how you can transition different states between routes. That would be persisting elements from one route to the next. Hopefully at this point you have a pretty good understanding of how view transitions work, and you know how to name certain elements so that they carry correctly across different routes. Next, we're going to talk about maintaining state. And here they give you some examples, but the idea here is that instead of replacing DOM nodes, you're going to simply move them between page navigations. So probably the easiest way to see this is with something like a video or an audio element. So let's use this one from the docs. I'm just going to drop it in here in the index route, and then let's also come to the projects route, and we'll drop it here as well. Now, if I come back over this way, you'll notice that here we are on the main route. This video should keep playing at 4, 5, 6 seconds when I go to projects. However, it restarts. So we need to do one more thing beyond the transition persist directive, and that would be to name it. Now, like we've already seen, you can do that with the transition:name directive, like right here, but they've actually given you a shorthand as well, where you can just add the name directly after transition persist. So if we were to come over here, we could just add this and call it something like video. Remember, this needs to be unique per page, so you'd want to make sure that whatever you name this, you wouldn't have something else named the same way. Let's grab this and replace it. Okay, so back over this way. Now you can see these people are about right there. If I jump back to the home page, now you can see it just keeps playing, right? We're still at 10 seconds. Go back to projects. We're still at 12 seconds. So it's really cool how you can transition these things kind of across the routes without making it restart. So you're preserving state between routes. Next, let's come back over this way. We're going to talk about transitioning with UI frameworks like React. Here you can see you can do the same thing with something like a counter. So let's go ahead and create that. And first, before we do too much, I guess we'll need to install React because it's not installed on this project. So let's just do npx astro add react, and then we'll say yes to all the questions it asks us. All right, perfect. npm run dev, we'll get that back up and running. And then let's come back over here, and we're going to add a component here, and we'll just call this counter. You can grab this if you want to from the linked code or just follow along here. But you'll see that I've got a counter and then I've got something odd that I've added, which is this page title, just to show you kind of how this works with a UI framework. So all we're going to do is increment this. So let's go ahead and add this somewhere. So I'm going to come here. Let's just comment this out. And then just below here, let's pull in the counter just like that. Now, in order to hydrate this with JavaScript, it will need a client directive. So let's do client load. And then I did have that page title prop. So let's go ahead and provide this something like home. And then let me jump back over to the projects page right over here. We'll do the same thing. So let's get rid of this. And then I'm just going to drop in that component. We'll need to go ahead and import it as well. So right here, if I do control and spacebar, that should pull right in up top. And let's see. There we go. Okay, cool. So now if I come back over here and we refresh, this should show us a counter, and I can increment it and I can decrement it, and everything should work. Now, notice what happens when I transition from the projects page with some kind of state like 2 here, and I come back to the home page. You'll notice that it restarts. So you can see that what we can do is add this transition persist directive here as well. So let me come back down this way, and we'll do transition persist, and I'll provide it a name. We'll call it something like React counter, and then I'm going to copy this and jump back over to the index, and we'll paste the same thing in here. Now, I actually want to make sure that this title here says projects. That way they have different props that are being passed in, because this tells you a little bit about how it works with these front-end UI frameworks. So if I increment now, I'm on the home route, and I come over to projects, you'll notice that this state stays the same, but the prop actually changes because I'm now passing in a different prop on the projects page. Now, the way that Astro works is that it re-renders your component with new values if you passed in props, but it will maintain the state. So right here, you can see that the state is retained, but you can re-render it with new props. Now, if you want to override this default behavior, you can add one additional directive, and that is this transition persist props. Because by default, it will keep the state, but it will re-render the component, which means any props that are passed in, like the page title, will be re-rendered. However, if I add this to both of these, let's do that, and then I come back over this way, it will increment correctly, except this time it will keep the current props, like projects that have been passed in here, when we transition routes. So if I come back over to the home page here, you'll notice it stays with projects because it does not re-render the component, and the state stays around as well. Now, pay special attention if you're passing in props that then are used to generate state, because that's something you'll have to kind of navigate what you want it to be like. If I get rid of this, it will go back to the default behavior. So let's go ahead and do that. And now you'll see that if I increment over here and I switch to the projects page, it will keep the state, but re-render any props that have been passed in. Okay, hopefully that makes sense how you'd use that directive. In the next video, we're going to look at animations. including built-in animations that come with view transitions, how to customize them, and then how to write your own from scratch. I think the default animations in these view transitions are really nice, where everything fades by default, and then if you have something named like these cards, they kind of slide into place. I think that's really great, but you can customize this either by using a pre-built animation, you can customize a pre-built animation, or you can roll your own. So we're going to look at those three things in this video. I'm going to come back over to the docs here, and you can see that by default, it uses the fade animation. Initial, as I understand it, uses the browser's default styling for these, and then you can also slide it left or right if you're going forwards or backwards. And finally, you can have it set to none, where this really works best if you want to disable all the browser's default animations and then customize each individual transition yourself. So let's go ahead and do these in kind of that order. So I'm going to come over here, and we're going to set this transition none on the HTML, and I just have the base layout open up. Now what I want to do, though, is provide a slide animation for all the main content. Now, should you do this? Honestly, probably not. I don't think it looks that great, and it can be kind of disorienting. But you can see now, if I come over here to the home page, just kind of swap out that way. Projects go that way as well. If I use the backwards or forwards button, you'll see it changes the direction. That's kind of the default built-in. Now, you can also, beyond using some of these pre-built ones, you can take a pre-built one and customize it. So here you can see that they've taken the fade animation, and they simply changed the duration. Now here's the typing of how these look. They have a name, delay, duration, easing, fill mode, and direction. So you can see they're just changing that one property here. So let's go ahead and pull this in here. And I'm going to get rid of this right here, and we'll get rid of that as well. And then let's come to the main section here, and I'm going to go ahead and change the fade. So I need to pull this in with Control and click. That should come in from Astro Transitions right there. Now, just to make this really obvious, let's change this to something like 4.4 seconds. Okay, so now if I come over here and I go to the home page, you'll see it takes a really long time to change that up. So I'm using the default transition, but I'm simply changing it to fit my needs. Now, if I come back over here, you can also create your own. You'll notice that this is the kind of interface it needs, where you give it a forwards and a backwards direction, and each of these point to something that gives you an old and new pairing. So it can tell how it should transition between an old and new page, whether it's going forwards or backwards. Now, if we were to type this all out, we could do something like this, but you could see that what they're doing is giving it the exact shape we looked up above, where it has an old and a new property here as part of an object that then assigns these to a forwards and a backwards property of another object. And then you simply pass it your transition animate, and you pass it the name of your animation. Astro will look at this animation, and if it's going forwards, it will go ahead and do it from old to new in one direction, and if it's going backwards, it will go from old to new in the other direction. Now, personally, this is probably all we'll talk about when it comes to animations in this course, because I think as a whole, you should leave it on the default, and even then use view transition animations sparingly. Once view transitions hit the browsers, people were very concerned that they were going to be abused. And I think there probably is good reason for that fear, so don't be one of those people. Next, we're going to look at how you can control all the routing behavior with a few more directives. For instance, you can totally skip the transition on any given link if you want to. There's also a built-in navigate function where you can trigger a view transition without clicking on a link, and then you can decide how it interacts with the browser's history. Finally, we'll look at how view transitions work with forms. I'll see you there. Let's talk about controlling the navigation behavior of view transitions. Now, I've got the docs open again because I think it's really good practice for you to make sure you understand how to find all this in the docs, but I obviously don't want to just be reading the docs to you. However, there's a lot of detail here, and I think it's important to show you where you can find more if you're interested. Now, the docs break this down into 3 sections. It tells you how you can skip the view transition behavior. It also tells you how you can direct the history in the browser, and then finally how to trigger your own navigations. We'll also look at how to do this with forms in a moment. So first of all, you can see it's very easy to skip it, where you just add this attribute to any link. Now, by default, you'll remember that if you click on any link element or you use the backwards or forward navigation events, that it automatically triggers view transitions. However, you can prevent that client-side navigation if you want to. You can see all they've done is added this data Astro reload to a link, and now it will reload rather than use the view transition. So you'll see here they have this on the index page where it will reload. However, on the articles page, it will not reload. So it'll actually transition between like the card to the main body of the element. So not too much here, but just to note that you can force a navigation if you want to. Now, in order to keep the same sequence that we talked about a second ago, I'm going to skip this navigation right here. We're going to come back down here to the history options. You'll notice that the different history options you have allow you to push state in one way or the other. Now here it's showing it in the navigate method, but you can also just do this on any element as well. Now these work very similar to browser APIs where you can push it. This simply creates a new entry in the browser history. So as you go forwards or backwards, it kind of saves that state. Alternatively, you can replace it where it will actually update the URL, but it will not save that as like a step in the browser's history. So it just swaps it out. And then finally, you can simply leave it on auto, where the router will attempt to push state, but if it can't, then it will not save that to the browser's history. Now, this is kind of one of these that if you know, you know, and if you don't think you'll need it, then just stick with the auto as well. Okay, finally, let's look at how to force a navigation if you want to. Again, we're just kind of looking at the doc so far, but you can see here that an example might be you have some kind of form where as they swap between options like play or blog or about or contact, you actually want to force a navigation to those exact routes. Since we're just overviewing how this works, let's go ahead and grab this and we'll just create this over here in a component. So we'll call this React form.tsx, and then we'll paste this thing in. Now I need to actually have this somewhere, so let's come over to the index page and let's get rid of this counter, and then we'll pull in a React form. And for some reason it's not pulling in, that's all right. I'll just come up here and copy this down, and we'll have a React form like that. Okay, so if I come back over to the home page and we refresh, I should see right here we've got this React form. Now the way we set this up is that whenever we transition one of these on change using React here, it's going to navigate to a new element. Now, if I try this right now, nothing's going to happen, right? If I come to about, nothing will happen because I have to hydrate this with JavaScript. So let's come over here and make sure we add client load here, or we could do idle, whatever, it doesn't really matter. In this case, now, if I come over here and go to about, it will transition to the about page using a view transition. And I forgot we have that really long transition, but you can see it does actually work. Now, honestly, I don't think this is the best example because I'm not sure why you wouldn't just use links at this point, but it does illustrate the point where you can use the navigate function, even in something like React, a UI framework, to navigate using view transitions. Now, if I come back over it this way, we're going to also see that you can have a lot of these same options here as well. So all they've done is provided an href, but I can also decide how the history should work. And then finally, if there is form data, we can use that as well. We'll look at that in just a second. So right now, if I come back over this way, and let's see, let's go to, I guess we didn't have an about, did we? So let's come back over here and let's maybe change these. We've got projects and blogs. So let's change this to projects. And then maybe down here, we'll change this to the home route. And that should be just like this. And we'll get rid of this final option. Now, lastly, just so we don't have to wait so long, I'm going to come back over here and get rid of this one just so that we stick with the default. Okay, perfect. Let's come back over here now. And as I change to home or projects or whatever, it now transitions here. You'll see that I actually get this readout here. Console Ninja is telling me that everything is great. It's just a GET request. Okay, cool. So that is actually working for us. And now what I want to do is customize some more beyond this right here. So let's actually decide what kind of history it should do. So this is an optional object here. You'll notice I've got form data I can pass along. I've got history, I've got info, source element, and state. So let's look at the history. And here are our options. We've got push, and we've got replace, and we've got auto. Now, by default, it's going to try to push the state. So let's go ahead and use replace so that it will update the state and not give us a back error. So if I come over here, you'll notice now it goes back to the blog forward just like that. However, if I come to the home page, now if I go backwards, it's not in the history. It just goes right back to the blog. It skips over that change, even though obviously it was the same route in that instance. So it's really nice that you can trigger these navigation events without having to click on links or generate links for people to click on. So if you want to have more customization over how things navigate, this is a great way to do it. You'll notice it does give us this form data object that you can use for post requests as well. And if I come down this way, there's a whole section on how you can transition with forms using view transitions. Now, there's not a ton to say here other than that by default, it will use both GET and POST requests. It supports both of these when you're using a form and submitting it, but it attaches this multi-part form data to your method. Now, if you want to stick with the default in browsers, you can revert the ink type to use the default that comes with most browsers. Just like with links, you can use data Astro reload, and this will not use view transitions. It will actually hard refresh on submission. Now, we're going to have an example of forms later on in the course where we're going to be using view transitions, so we'll implement this ourselves in a little bit. And finally, I want to come up this way, and we're going to look at something down here. You might remember that I said that this doesn't work on page transition. However, I can use it if I've just freshly reloaded. Now, that's because client-side JavaScript is a little tricky here. As you transition, you need to allow things like event listeners to still be clickable later on. And rather than just throwing a directive on this or wrapping this in one of those Astro directives, I want to talk through the entire client-side loading process so that you understand why and when you need to use these directives to control client-side JavaScript. I've mentioned a few times that when you're working with client-side scripts and view transitions, you need to take special care. And that's because of the way that scripts work by default in Astro. Now, if I come over here on the front home page here and we refresh, you see I've got a form where I can enter a name and an email address. If I jump over here, I've got the server running. For the back end, we were using JSON server at the time, and then I've got the front end running as well. Now, it might look like it works. In fact, I can come over here and say like Joe, email at email.com, and it will actually submit, and it looks like it works properly for me. However, as soon as I go to a different page and then come back, if I were to try this again and I come back down here, whatever I put here, email at email.com, you'll notice that when I try to submit it, it just ignores the script altogether, right? It submits it directly to the page. Why is this happening? Well, that's because of the way that scripts work by default in Astro. So let me come over here and we'll clear this out again. And I'm going to jump over to the contact form. And you'll notice if I scroll all the way down that I've just got a simple script tag here. Now, by default, Astro bundles this into a module, and modules will only run once. Once I transition away and come back, it's already run at that point, so the browser just completely ignores the script. Now, there's a couple things you can do, but Astro gives you access to all the lifecycle events of this transition. So what I can do is just say, hey, after every transition, I also want you to execute this script in this way. So what I'm going to do is come right over here. We're just going to grab all of this, and I'm going to put it all inside of an event listener on the document. So we're going to say document.add event listener, and we're going to listen for Astro : we've got a bunch of different options. If I come over here, we've got after preparation, after swap, before preparation, before swap, and page load. The page load is once the new page is already in the browser. It's the very last thing that happens in the transition event. So after everything's already there, all the DOM elements, that's when I want to actually run this again. So I'm going to use page load, and then all we're going to do is fire this function right here where I'll paste back in everything we already had. So after every single transition, it should run all this fresh and new for us. So let me come back down this way, and I'll go ahead and add a name like this, Chris, and email at email.com, and it should successfully work, right? Thanks for reaching out. And if I go to projects and I come back, now this will fire again because the transition has just happened, which means all of this, once again, all these selectors, the functions, they should all work properly. I come back down this way, I can have something like Joe, email at email.com, and this should work as well. So this is one way of working with client-side JavaScript, essentially just wrapping in a function that will tell it when to run, and that is every time after any page transition. Now this also happens after the first transition, in other words, when you first load the site, so you're safe to just put it all inside there. Now we do have another script on the tag, on the page, and that's this section down here where we've got this theme picker. Now if I refresh and try to change it, you'll see it will change, but then basically I get this flash of dark and white, and it won't re-click, and if I go to another page, it's just dead as well. So let's fix that as well. I'm going to come over here, it's in my footer, and I added this after the project just to give us another practice with view transitions. If I come down here, you'll see we've got a couple of things. We've got this script for the copyright span. That might be something we want to play with. And then we've also got the theming scripts here, where we grab the theme button, we then fetch the existing theme, we set the theme, we also listen for the event on the DOM being loaded, and then we set that theme, and we've also listened to the button being clicked. So what we're going to do is grab all of this and kind of change this in two different ways. Document.add event listener, and we're going to listen for that same event. So Astro, and what we want is page load. So this is after the new page is there. I want to do several things. So first of all, let's paste all this back in. We definitely want this to run. We also want to grab the theme button, the existing theme. All this works just fine. The trouble here is that this window event listener is never going to run inside of here. So I'm just going to drag this directly out. And we're just going to say that if there is an existing theme, then we're going to set the theme to whatever that existing theme is. So that should work properly for us. Same thing happens here for the theme button. That means I should be able to come in here and click. It should go to light mode, and I should click, and it's no longer working. Now, the reason it's no longer working is because this is not dynamic, right? It's checked it once, and now this is what it's checking down here. So what I'll probably need to do is grab this right inside here. We're just going to switch this over here so that we check the local theme each time. Now I should be able to come here and just click back and forth. So I'm in dark mode on my machine. I've set this to light mode, and if I refresh, you'll see it does get to light mode, but not without going through that flash. If I come over here, it also stays in light mode, but once again, it goes through that flash system. So there's another event that we can hook into on this transition that will allow us to avoid that kind of flashing behavior. So let's come back down this way just to kind of have this accessible. What I want to do is add another script tag, although I suppose you could do this in the same one, but just to keep it clean, I'm going to add document.add event listener, and this time we're going to listen for Astro. And what I want is after they've swapped the new pages, but before the new page has been loaded. That's when I want to set whatever the theme happens to be. So we're going to do after swap here. And whenever that happens, all I want to do is check the existing theme. And if it does exist in local storage, I want to load that before all this stuff is hit right here, right? So all I'm going to do is grab this. In fact, I'll just grab all this right here. We're just going to duplicate this code for now, although you can make it more dry if you want to. So now if I come over here and I go to a different page like projects, you'll notice I don't get that flash, right? Now you still have the initial flash, and there's a couple of ways to deal with that. But now at least between transitions here, it just stays in whatever theme you've set it at because it checks it and updates it right here. Now, if I come back over here to the projects, you'll notice we've got this filtering system. And if I come over here and click on these, it's not going to work any longer. So that's one more thing to think about. So let's come over to the projects page right over here. And if I scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see that I've got a script tag as well. Now, the way we dealt with this here is with a bunch of client-side scripts. And when I click on this, all it's going to do is reload the page. So it actually avoids our view transition altogether and just hard refreshes the page. So I could come in here and grab all this right here and put this inside a document.addEventListener. And here we want to grab it after it's loaded the new page in and then apply all these filters. Up top here, you'll remember that we did import a few things. So I need to actually pull these out like this. And I should be able to come over here and select these. And how it actually works for me, you get that flash because again, it's reloading the page. Now we won't take the time to set up the theming now. I've done something like this on my channel before, but what you'd want to do is store the theme, not in the local storage, but in a cookie. Then in the middleware file, what you could do is grab the request that comes in, check on the cookie, and then set a local that then could be set on the actual HTML element. I've just got a data attribute called data theme that sets either dark or light if the user has set a preference. So that's how you'd avoid the initial flash. Now we're going to use view transitions on some of the projects coming up. So I know this has been more like a walk through the documentation, but I really want to implement this in real projects rather than come up with like micro examples that aren't super helpful. But hopefully this shows you kind of how you can interact with this, especially with client-side JavaScript, which really is the only tricky part of working with view transitions. But in the next video, what I want to do is go through the entire lifecycle event with a few different examples so that you could see how this works, when you might want to tap into one of those events to alter the document in some way. So I'll see you in the next video. I promised a more in-depth view of walking through this whole transition process. So I've come up with this little illustration that I think accurately reflects kind of the entire flow. There's a lot of complexity here, so I'll try to break it down for you. What happens is somebody clicks in the old document to start, and that starts by fetching a new page. It simply goes to the server, and this data attribute is added to the old page, data Astro transition with either forward or back, depending if it's going forward or backward in the history of the document. Then what happens is the browser starts this start view transition method. Now this is something that's built into modern browsers and it kicks off this entire process. This is just what Astro is tapping into. Now during this process, importantly, it screenshots the old document and then fires the first of 5 events called Astro before preparation. Now you can access this to do certain things before it parses the new document that's coming in right here. In fact, if I jump over to the docs, you'll see that it says that this happens during the beginning of the preparation phase, and it gives you some examples like loading a spinner, or perhaps you want to change the direction of the navigation, which is either forward or backwards for some kind of custom animation that you might set up. They give you an example of running an async spinner as an example here, but this would be before the new document is parsed, but after the event has been triggered with a user click. Okay, so back over here, we continue on parsing the new document. The new document is parsed and it's then compared to the old document where the screenshot was taken. This fires the second event called Astro after preparation. Once again, they give you some examples and these can be worked together where you can see how you can use before preparation to show a loading spinner and maybe after preparation to remove it. So this tells you that it's been loaded, it's processed that, and this is before it actually starts to swap things out. That's the next stage. And right before that happens, you get this Astro before swap. Now, importantly, there's this new document that now lives on the actual event itself. That allows you to tap into the new document that's already been parsed during this preparation phase. Now, lots of things happen here. It swaps out head items, keeping shared style sheets and scripts and anything with a transition persist in the head. Then it replaces the body, also paying attention to those transition persists. They stay as well. If necessary, the scroll position is restored. And then finally, there's an after swap event that says, hey, these two have already been swapped, but we're not yet showing this to the user. So let's come back over here. You're going to see that we've got some before swap options here. We didn't do this in the last video before swap. You can kind of do this in a few different places. We just did it before it was actually visible in the browser. So we did it after swap because even right here, it's not quite visible in the browser yet. But the new document has already been parsed. And like I said, you now get access to the new document on the event itself. They just named that EV here. But that means I can look at the new document and change stuff on it before it's actually loaded for the viewer to see. Now, you can also use this before swap to actually change how the whole thing is implemented. Here you can see that by default, it's going to keep persistent elements and then replace the body of the new document, right? At this point of the lifecycle, though, you could choose to define your own swap implementation. Now, this is too complex for our use cases here, but you can see that you could diff the entire contents of an existing document, which some other routers do evidently. But all the comparison has happened now, things have been swapped, and the browser is ready to show the new document to the user. So here, before it does that, it's going to run new style sheets and new scripts. And my understanding is that this happens right after this after swap event. Then the new document is shown to the client. At that point, the final thing happens, which is this Astro page load event, where everything, including all blocking scripts, has already been loaded into the new document, and the viewer is seeing that. Now, we use this in a couple of different places, and usually this is what you want to wrap all your script stuff in. If you only want to run it once, you can just use this once true, and then it will only happen one time. But there's actually something else I haven't shown you yet, which is the script re-execution. If you use data Astro rerun, it will actually rerun your script, although it does have to be inline, so you lose the ability to use TypeScript and things like that. Let's jump back down here, though. You can see that this is after everything has happened. All the blocking scripts are loaded. Now you can listen to this final event that says, hey, the entire navigation is done. Then it can fire something at that point. That's typically when you want to look at all your event listeners and run all your JavaScript once again. Now, we didn't look at an example of after swap, but we did use this to actually set our dark mode theme, you might remember in the last video. After things have been swapped, but before it's been shown to the user, that's when we want to make the switch, so you never have those flashes between different route transitions. Now, a lot of these are more specialty use cases. For the most part, for client-facing scripts, you can usually use this page load attribute and just wrap whatever you already have inside of this to make sure that after the transition has happened, it then goes ahead and runs all your script. Well, I do hope this walkthrough was really helpful just to kind of get a basic understanding of what's going on. I'll try to remember to add a screenshot of this down below. And if my knowledge of this updates, I'll try to update this as well. In the next module, we're going to look at internationalization, which is a feature that allows you to show different content to different users depending on their internationalization preferences, like English or Spanish or German or French. All right, I'll see you there.